If we need to make this feel like we have a large audience, so if everyone sits in the middle seats, then no one will notice the difference. So Nathaniel, just wave to me when we're live. Friends, welcome to Mount Zion Temple and all of us joining online through live streaming. We're glad that you are here. We hope that you can hear okay. There's a little bit of an echo, and Nathaniel, if you get a chance to work on that at some point, that would be great. What we are doing is we are zooming in Gidon from Jerusalem, and we will be introducing him in a moment. And all of us are going to be here for what promises to be a really important conversation. And I will just introduce this by giving kudos to Joe Nathan, who was the first one to be talking to Representative Hornstein about this organization, and then coming on the Mount Zion trip last February, and we met with Gidon in Jerusalem, and we learned about this organization, which is inspiring. It's been featured by Thomas Friedman, and Joe said we need to bring their message here to Minnesota. Jonathan Eisenthal took up the mantle, did a phenomenal job with organizing today, and I know that many are joining us live streaming, both because Joe's article about this went across Minnesota, and because of Jonathan's organizing with having St. Paul Jewish Federation co-sponsor this. There may be other co-sponsors. I believe it's primarily the St. Paul Federation and Mount Zion. And with that, we need hope. We need visions for the future that are not about the reality that we are living in right now. So today is investing in that hope in a very real way and hearing about the work that is being done. And I'm very pleased that Representative Frank Hornstein, who's dedicated his life to making this world a better place in so many ways and has been serving in our legislature and leading there in so many ways and thinking about all the different issues that affect us locally and nationally and even now internationally. It is a pleasure to have known you, Frank, for all these years, and it's a joy to welcome you to Mount Zion.
Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Spilker. Good morning, everybody. I'm very, very pleased to be a part of this program. I want to thank Joe Nathan as well, and to engage and ask some questions and hear the thoughts of my friend Gidon Bromberg. We first met in 2009. I took a group of legislators to the region and knew about his work, and he introduced us to some of the facts about the Jordan River, and we went to the Jordan River and saw raw sewage going into the river, and he talked about the Good Water Neighbors program, where Jordanian, Palestinian, and Israeli mayors were working cooperatively to address some of the water issues in the Jordan. And that, from there on, I was inspired and have been in contact with Gidon since then. He's also spoken to other groups that I've brought to the region. And I just found out or just saw that we've been Facebook friends since 2011. So we go back. And just a couple of notes about Gidon by way of introduction. So he's the Israeli director of EcoPeace Middle East. And EcoPeace Middle East is one of the only NGOs, nonprofits, that has offices in Amman, Ramallah, and in Tel Aviv. So they really are working cooperatively, or have been, and we'll hear more about what those relationships are now, Jordanians, Palestinians, and Israelis together on environmental issues. So they promote sustainable development and advance peace efforts through environmental justice. And so they have a number of paid staff and organizers. Gidon founded the organization under the name EcoPeace in 1994. So this is an organization that's been around for a while. He speaks regularly on the world stage, at the United Nations, European Parliament, various international environmental conferences, bringing his message of hope and how environmental issues can promote peace. And by profession, Gidon Bromberg is an attorney. He previously worked in public interest environmental law. He holds a Bachelor of Economics and Law degree from Monash University in Australia, his native country. And he's also been a fellow of the New Israel Fund and completed a master's degree in international environmental law at American University. So we welcome Gidon Bromberg to virtually to Mount Zion Temple in St. Paul and to our state of Minnesota. And I'm just going to, what we'll do for the first part of our program will just be some Q&A. I'll ask Gidon Bromberg some questions, and then I believe we'll have opportunity here for a conversation. So welcome, Gidon, and I guess the first question I would ask you is, how are you and your staff doing, in these very, very, very difficult and horrible times? Well, but why don't you introduce yourself a little beyond my introduction, and then maybe we can get into that difficult question.
Thank you, Frank. So firstly, I'm really just delighted to be back in Minnesota. Unfortunately, this time virtually, but I have really a wonderful memory of you introducing me to Friends of the Mississippi.
That's right.
And I joined on a canoe with them, traveling down, only a few hours, but very, very memorable, traveling down the Mississippi between your beautiful cities there. And of course, dreaming that one day the River Jordan could be 1/10 of the width of the Mississippi in your part of the world, and of course it gets much wider further down as it goes. So it's wonderful to be back, and I'm very grateful to the organizers for the invitation to speak before you. It is a very difficult time. It's a horrible time for all of us in the region. We've all lost loved ones. As Israelis, we have in our minds constantly the hostages that are more than 100 days still in Gaza. For our Palestinian and Jordanian staff, it's a horrific period of great loss of life, of innocent life in Gaza as well. EcoPeace, in fact, is the only regional organization that exists in any field. There's no other office, there's no other organization, which is one organization with a single board that made up of 4 Palestinians, 4 Jordanians, 4 Israelis. I'm one of 3 co-directors. So Nada Majdalani is my Palestinian co-director that runs our office in Ramallah with about 20 staff. Yana Abu Talib, another woman, is my co-director at Amman, that runs our offices and an eco park that we have there with about 30 staff. And here in Israel, we're also about 20 staff. All of our staff have either lost a family member or someone close to them, or know of injured individuals. And in some cases, some of our staff have lost 30, 50 members of their extended family. It's raining today. It's raining heavily. It's been raining for about 3 days across the region. And generally, we see rain as such a blessing. But at this time, of course, we're thinking about the people that don't have shelter, the hostages, in what conditions they might be. And it's so odd for an organization like EcoPeace to be sort of wanting it not to rain at this time. But that's how we're taken by the tragic events that we're heavily involved in. We've lost colleagues that we've worked very closely with on both sides. Just 10 days before October 7th, we held an event with a local mayor in Israel, in the Gaza envelope, a kilometer from less, 500 meters from the Israel-Gaza border. And we held an event that was discussing our achievements together to improve the situation on the ground in Gaza. Because EcoPeace has been extremely involved on all water, sanitation issues, energy issues related to Gaza for more than 20 years. We're largely responsible for 4 modern sewage treatment plants being built in Gaza. And we got to a stage the summer before last where 65% of the sewage of Gaza was now being treated in modern sewage treatment plants, when a decade earlier there was no sewage treatment. Less than a decade, as late as 2018, that's when the first modern sewage treatment plant was built. And we were able to highlight that, security issues, as legitimate and clearly important as they are not only military security issues, but we also need to deal with water security and health security, because we're able to highlight to all sides that failing to treat sewage in Gaza has implications for the population in Gaza, for the water quality, because groundwater is being polluted, sewage was literally flowing out to the Mediterranean, 108 million litres of untreated sewage was flowing out of Gaza every day, 108 million litres. I'm sorry, I don't speak gallons, so you'll have to calculate that for me. That's a hell of a lot of sewage. And that sewage was clearly polluting the beaches of Gaza and threatening public health on the Gazan side. But the currents were also taking that sewage to the Israeli coastline and threatening Israeli public health. And in fact, a critical role that EcoPeace played was releasing to the public, because the information was there, but it wasn't released to the public, that Israel's desalination plants, which today produce 70% of our drinking water, were under threat, and that the plant in Ashkelon, 7 kilometers north of Gaza, was being intermittently closed down because you can't treat, you don't want to drink water, desalinated water polluted by sewage. That's 15% of Israel's drinking water was being intermittently closed because our message was that we can't disengage from a shared environment. And I think what October 7th tragically reminded us that in all circumstances, it doesn't matter who the enemy is, fences will never be enough. We need to build relations and invest and never give up for peace, because disaster on one side leads to disaster on the other side. And as difficult as it is, and it is difficult, and it's painful, and the publics on all sides are incredibly traumatized and angry, and the last thing that people want to speak about is cooperation, is about some sort of shared future, when the present is just so unacceptable. But as we see it, there is no other alternative. If we don't now start talking about a better future and what that could look like, then we'll never create that better future that we need for our children and our grandchildren on all sides. So first and foremost, you asked me, Frank, how are our staff? So our staff are incredibly traumatized, and I think for the first month, we hired therapists in each office to assist staff overcome or try to overcome the trauma. We're subject to completely different media coverage that tell a completely different story, and you really need to reach out to try to get a more balanced picture of what has happened and what is happening. But it's not obvious, and I can say to you that to some degree, staff in all offices are seen as somewhat of a traitor by a percentage of their populations. There are campaigns in some of our neighbouring countries that are against us and see any type of cooperation as working with the enemy, even on these issues of environment, of water, of sanitation, of energy. And it takes incredibly brave people. So our leadership team, involving our 3 directors, for 3 months, continue to meet virtually, of course, almost every single day. Our education team, our advocacy teams, planning and implementing in a manner to rebuild trust and to think about how, what lessons we can learn from and draw from the past, in order to be as effective as we can, because things are harder, they're not easier, much harder.
Well, thank you for that very powerful and sobering and disturbing answer, and honest as well. I have a follow-up, but before I do, I did forget in my introduction that we did canoe down the Mississippi. I was in a different canoe with someone that knew what they were doing, and Gidon was in a different canoe with someone who knew what they were doing. And I will say that was one of the most frightening experiences of my life. We started in the gorge by Crosby Park, which was nice. It's pretty narrow there, but then when we got down to the Minnesota River and then out towards Harriet Island, it was quite an experience, but I was relieved to get out of the canoe, and we did have a very good experience. So I did want to link Gidon with a group called Friends of the Mississippi River, and so they arranged that canoe trip for us several years ago in fall. It was beautiful. But my follow-up, Gidon, is is EcoPeace involved in some kind of humanitarian relief or issues, or engaged with Gaza right now?
Yeah, so straight after the October 7th massacre and then the outbreak of the war, we got heavily engaged. Of course, we had to replan all of our programming because it's just not relevant. We were heavily focused on the climate crisis, and maybe I'll go into it a little bit later on advancing what we authored was a call for a Green Blue Deal for the Middle East, which is a climate program. Still, of course, extremely relevant because we are a climate hotspot. We're experiencing climate change more severely than almost any other part of the planet. But the urgency was clearly the crisis, and each office, certainly Israeli and Palestinian, started to immediately focus on what we can do for our refugees. So we had so many, and continue to have so many displaced Israelis. What could we do for them, for farmers that have lost, and were going to lose all of their income if they couldn't harvest. So staff volunteered in food packaging and clothes assistance and in going out to the fields to assist farmers in their livelihood. Within weeks we started organising, once the displaced families from both the south and the north, because we have from the Gaza envelope but also from the northern part of Israel, over 200,000 people that have had to leave their homes and are in hotels all over the country. So we also started offering, together with other organizations in Israel, tours for the kids, for the families, to help on again, trauma relief through going out to nature. Many of the families from Tef Aza, from the Gaza envelope, from some of them were in Eilat, so we organized tours of coral reefs, understanding, again, for, highlighting our agenda of the importance of the environment, the fact that the environment is shared. When you're in the coral reefs of Eilat, you're seeing Aqaba on the other side, and you're, of course, reminded that cooperation is a necessity. It's not something that really can be questioned. Or at the hotels of the Dead Sea, understanding the demise of the Dead Sea, or any of the streams. They're all cross-border, and taking families along walks to understand nature and to understand the cross-border nature of all of our environment here. And we continue to do that until today. We also, in the Palestinian office, there were a lot of workers. 17,000 Gazans were working in Israel on that day. And they clearly couldn't go back to Gaza. Some of them, thousands of them, are in Ramallah. And they left Gaza only with their clothes. So our Palestinian office helped those workers with clothing, with food, with some sanitation. They are sleeping in schools in the West Bank. So some very basic assistance straight out. And then our staff, of course, started to communicate with our alumni. We have extensive education programs. In Israel, we were asked by the Ministry of Education in Israel to write climate curriculum for high schools. We train Israeli teachers on climate issues from a regional perspective. So we reached out to the teachers to check in with them to see how they're coping. What needs do they have, because all schools became virtual. All schools were closed in Israel for in-person for over a month. So we're able to, from the Corona period, use curriculum that we developed for virtual learning and help our teachers at this time of great stress, and also speak to another education program of climate diplomats that we've also been running for many years, which are university and young professionals from various fields that are interested in the climate issue. Yet, the alumni of these programs were and remain, in trauma. Some have seen posts of the climate diplomats from the other countries that shock them, and vice versa. And so each office was engaged with national dialogue and conversation as to how to understand the situation. And do we give up? Do we give up on peace? Do we give up on cooperation? Or do we try to draw lessons, but remain engaged? And overwhelmingly, last week, we had a new launch of another cohort of climate diplomats, some 60 Israelis participating, we were doing it at a national level at this time, participating on regional cooperation on climate issues, both Jewish and Arab Israelis, remaining committed and understanding. But I think our most important program, and by the end of by the middle of December, we really start to develop a new comprehensive program that we think will occupy us for the next year. One aspect of the program is what humanitarian assistance we can provide or help in advocacy in Gaza. Already in the first days of the war, the Israeli Minister of Energy decided to stop the sale. Israel has 3 pipes that that sells water to Gaza. And the minister, in complete anger and outrage as to what had happened, decided that those 3 water pipes would be shut. Now, irrespective of whether that was in compliance with international law or not, we argued that that's not a right decision. That doesn't improve the situation, not for Palestinians and not for Israelis. And we worked. The same attitude was also taken on fuel. And on fuel, the concern is that Hamas would and does take fuel destined for other purposes, for its military. Yet without fuel, you can't treat sewage. Without fuel, you can't pump water from one place to the other where it's needed. And without fuel, you can't pump sewage from one location either out to the sea, because many of the sewage treatment plants are today not operating, and you can't avoid disease. So we reached out to Israel's leading health professionals and the heads of Israel's leading public health institutions, and co-authored with them letters to the War Cabinet that it's in Israel's interest to make sure that sufficient water flows, that there's fuel in order to deal with the pumping to allow the pumping of that water where it's needed, and to treat sewage where we can, or to pump the sewage out. Because without those measures, disease, has already broken out in Gaza on several issues, but pandemic disease would break out, and that doesn't stop amongst the Gazan population. That makes Israeli soldiers subject to disease, and of course the Israeli population at large. In fact, the Egyptian population too. And therefore, very quickly, and here, the letter in Hebrew of Israeli health professionals was helpful, but I think the Biden administration, of course, played the critical role of particularly for the fuel, but also for the water, and of increased humanitarian assistance. But the understanding and hearing that the War Cabinet hears from Israel's leading health professionals that this is needed for Israel's own interests. And, you know, when the announcements were made to reverse, I mean, within a week, within less than a week, the water flow started to flow back. And it took longer for the fuel. It took about a month for the fuel to come back. But when the justification for the fuel was announced by the head of the National Security Council of Israel, Tzachi Hanegbi, he uses the exact language of our letter. Well, this is in the end Israel's interest. That without these measures, the public health of Israelis is at great risk. And you know, I think we all need to understand that you know this is not easy, because Israelis rightfully feel that the humanitarian needs of our hostages are not being met at all, and that this is very one way. But you know, it's the right thing to do. It's the right legal thing to do. It's the right moral thing to do, and it's in Israel's interest to do it. And these are all hard things to be dealing with in the midst of a war, in the midst of highly emotive, emotional circumstances. And we continue. This remains a major focus of our work, you know, to make sure that what's called wash, water, sanitation and health issues are properly dealt with. We still have a long way to go, and we still have, you know, elements in Gaza, of course, run by Hamas that, you know, want to see those materials also go for its use, and not for the public use necessarily. And that of course remains a tremendous challenge. And I think a second major focus, because of our structure, because of our office in Jordan, our office in Ramallah in the West Bank and in Israel, we've also been promoting additional avenues, additional what's called corridors of getting relief into Gaza. You probably have followed and have heard that Rafah, the Egyptian border, is the #1 entry of goods into Gaza, of humanitarian assistance. Israel reopened Kerem Shalom, which is right next to the Egyptian-Israeli Gaza border, to allow some trucks to go in there. And now a third corridor, a third entry, is through Jordan, and trucks carrying relief material, food, water, housing or shelter, are now also coming through Allenby Bridge. And you know, the reason why this is important is because everything needs to be checked before it enters Gaza. And there's these big scanners that scan the trucks, and they cause great delay, of course. So Allenby Bridge on the Israel-West Bank border has its own set of scanners. So that increases the capacity, because then from Allenby Bridge on the River Jordan, the goods can travel directly across Israel into Gaza without an additional check. And I think, you know, as we see the situation continue to unfold, more, not less, is needed, because resilience is dropping. You know, as the war continues, people have nothing of their own anymore. I mean, there's nothing left in the stores. There's nothing left as far as locally grown, and therefore there's complete dependency. So here too, we're in close coordination with the American administration. Satterfield, the special humanitarian envoy of the president, is very much behind this Jordan corridor and the nature of our relationship, the nature of our organisation. We also want to see the West Bank become an avenue for goods to come to Gaza so that economy can be strengthened. Instead of buying humanitarian goods in Egypt or in Jordan, if they can also be bought in the West Bank, then that would strengthen the West Bank economy. And Israeli security is the first to come and say that that's needed, because you have several 100,000 Palestinians from the West Bank that are not working in Israel anymore. There's a complete closure. And they haven't had income for 3 months. We're also very much focused also on day after thinking. So what happens at the end of the war? Will Hamas be removed militarily, completely? Will it be removed from governance? Who takes over? And that question, of course, needs to be heavily discussed now. And I think if you're following the media, you'll see that there's a reluctance of the current Israeli Prime Minister to discuss this issue, or at least sufficiently. And there is concern within the Israeli military, and of course also internationally with the Biden administration, with the Europeans, that this issue needs to be really understood, because in the north, where in the northern part of Gaza, where Hamas was largely militarily destroyed, we are seeing Hamas again playing a role in the provision for the population, because there's no one else to do it. So we're focused on the wash sector, on what do we do with sanitation issues, what do we do with water issues, who's going to govern, who's going to manage this infrastructure. This is all critical. That needs to be decided now, and there's different ideas, and so we're heavily involved in that issue. We're also already thinking about some of our earlier programming on climate resilience, and how do we think about the day after from that perspective. So Ecopeace is quite famous for some of our achievements, and one of those achievements is the signing of a deal between Israel, Jordan, and the UAE under the support of Secretary Kerry. It's called Project Prosperity Blue and Green, and the idea was an Ecopeace idea that Israel's leadership in desalinating seawater in the Mediterranean can supply not only needed water for Israelis and for Palestinians, but sell some of that water to Jordan at prices that Jordan couldn't meet, because the Mediterranean is around 100 kilometers from Jordan's major cities, while Jordan's closest sea, the Red Sea in Aqaba, is 3 times the distance to Oman, 4 times the distance to Irbid, Jordan's second largest city. And that translates quite simply into 3 or 4 times the cost. While Jordan, on the other hand, has vast desert areas where it can produce solar power, renewable energy, at prices that Israel could only dream of, at scale, because Jordan is a vast desert country. Israel has the Negev, but the Negev is captured. Half the Negev is military training areas, the other half are declared nature reserves. Israel's only 10% renewable. It's supposed to be 30% renewable by 2030, and zero net zero by 2050. We're so behind, and one of the major reasons why is that there's such a shortage of land for solar. While Jordan has vast desert areas. So, our original idea was that, Jordan could provide renewables both for the Israeli and the Palestinian electricity market, and desalination in Israel and in Gaza could provide water for Jordan. Now the project moved forward quite rapidly. Unfortunately, it moved forward without the Palestinians. We couldn't get the original interest of the PA in buying renewables from Jordan. And as long as Hamas was in power in Gaza, the desalination plant that was being proposed for Gaza wasn't moving forward. But the Israeli-Jordanian deal moved, and discussions moved even before the Abraham Accords, but after the signing of the Abraham Accords, within 6 months, the three governments, with US support, signed a memorandum of intent, or a letter of intent, based on EcoPizza study, nothing else, in 2021. Then in 2022, after doing their own studies, at the Sharm Conference of the Parties, they signed a memorandum of understanding. And then they were supposed to sign an actual purchase agreement that Israel would have 17% of its electricity produced in Jordan. And Jordan would buy 200 million cubic meters of water desalinated in Israel. And they were supposed to be signed in December at the climate COP, Conference of the Parties, that was held in Dubai. But of course the war broke out and it never got signed. Well, the opportunity that we now have, and look, there's so much rhetoric that the Jordanian foreign minister has said that it won't be signed. But this is not being recorded, and we know that the interest is there, and the interest is there not out of friendship and not out of doing a favor, but without that water, Jordan is in deep trouble. In fact, Israel, without that renewable energy, is also in deep trouble. But we now have the opportunity, I hope, that desalination also in Gaza could move forward. And that would actually sweeten the water, because the Jordanians, if it was both Palestinian and Israeli water being sold together, then that would make it easier at this time. And if the desalination plants in both Israel and Gaza could be powered by renewable energy produced in Jordan, then that's the type of vision that we need for our region. And if that vision reminds you of something, then I hope it reminds you of the coal and steel arrangements of Europe after World War II. Because the US forced France and Germany, in particular, after World War II, to get their act together and forced the production of coal and steel, which were the two most important natural resources of Europe at the time, the engines of warfare, to prevent another war from being imaginable. The US forced those industries to be dependent on each other. And EcoPeace, back in 2015, we asked the question, well, what's the coal and steel that could be relevant to the Middle East in the midst of a climate crisis? What are the critical natural resources? And we concluded, well, it's harnessing the sun through renewables, and it's harnessing the sea through desalination.
Right.
And this has been picked up so broadly. Again, the Biden administration, in its presentation at the G20 just before the war, before this last war, was looking at this corridor from India to Europe. And a key aspect of that corridor was expanding this idea that renewables could not only be produced in Jordan for Israel and for the Palestinians, but renewables could also be produced in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, in Egypt, and at scale sold to Europe to help a deal with Russian gas, to replace Russian gas. And some of those linkages would be through Israel. The linkage of the Israeli electricity network with the Cypriot, and then the Greek, and then you're on mainland Europe. And then Egypt to Crete, and then again mainland Europe. Well, now we could have not only an Israeli-Cyprus link, but we could have a Gaza-Cyprus link, and implement this vision. It's actually a vision of President Herzog. And he's also adopted, he calls it a renewable Middle East.
So, Gidon, that is, I think all of these interrelationships are so important and so helpful. You're talking about how we're all in this together in so many ways. And so I wanted to ask you one more question and before we get some from the audience here. You had mentioned in our conversation last time that EcoPeace Middle East was nominated for a Nobel Prize. Could you talk to us more about that?
So, yeah, it's the only bit of good news that we've recently received. And at the end of the year, or just before the end of last year, I got an email out of the blue from an intern that used to work that spent 6 months in the Tel Aviv office, who forwarded a letter from a set of professors from the Amsterdam Free University. The intern had worked with us and he'd spoken about us, and these professors are on the nominating committee of the Nobel Peace Prize. And they were worried that, and they researched us, and they wanted to nominate us, and they wanted us to be interviewed, to be considered for them nominating us for the Nobel Peace Prize. And they felt that if they'd written to us sort of out of the blue, we would ignore it, because who would believe that someone's writing to you to ask you to be interviewed for the Nobel Peace Prize? So it was quite remarkable, and in the end, we were co-nominated together with 2 other remarkable organizations, Women Wage Peace and Women of the Sun. Yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, the final committee is a committee in Norway, and they'll make a decision later this year. I don't know what chance we really have, other than that these issues are in the center of the world stage, and people see our 3 organizations as organizations that present hope, that show, because we're organizations that work together. In EcoPeace's case, Israeli, Palestinian, Jordanian. In Women Wage Peace and Women of the Sun, Israelis and Palestinians will have really an extensive track record of working together and making a difference on the ground. And yeah, I mean, it would be amazing to move forward on this, but we'll have to see. Please cross fingers with us.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that overview. We have about a half hour to 40 minutes for questions. And if anyone has them, raise your hand and I'll just bring the microphone over to you, Phil Donahue style, if you are old enough to remember that show. So thank you, Gidon. We'll have some Q&A now from the audience. Does anyone have a question? be shy. Yes, Rabbi.
Yes, thank you so much for coming to speak with us here this morning. I'm just curious, where do you see the work of American Jewish communities and especially synagogue communities to be able to come together to help support what you do?
So thank you for a really important question. So firstly, I think the American Jewish community is doing remarkable work. I mean, we feel your love. I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, I think if there's a time when the Jewish world has come together, it's this time. And in Israel, we're feeling it, we're experiencing it, we're seeing it. I think that what we've seen in Israel is how the government has failed, and has continued to fail after October 7th, until now. The government is not supporting sufficiently displaced families, displaced people, people that have lost all their income, have lost everything. And so much has been done by civil society in Israel, and so much of that has been done with the support of the Jewish community in America, and elsewhere, but particularly America. So firstly, I think the Israelis are very grateful, and we feel that. I think as far as supporting particularly the work of EcoPeace, which is not an Israeli organization, we're a regional organization, then it's, we're dependent on financial support. We're a 501c3. We're actually registered in the United States. So, considering supporting our activities, be it on the education side, on the advocacy side, is of course extremely welcome. I think it's critical that the importance of the water, sanitation, health sector in Gaza, in the region, that it's understood that this is a shared interest. There's an emotional side that certainly in Israel, that as long as the hostages are held, no humanitarian assistance should go into Gaza. And perhaps some of you have seen the demonstrations, including family members of hostages, trying to stop humanitarian trucks going into Gaza. And emotionally, as an Israeli, I can understand that. But logically, of course, that's not the way to go. And the voice of the American Jewish community and of, I think, of the U.S. administration, that this is important, that this is essential for Israel and the region, that this continue and this be expanded. I think that's a very important message that continues to, that should be said very clearly by the American Jewish people towards any American administration. You have elections coming up. Yeah. So continue to understand the importance of this issue and bring attention to your elected members, such as Frank and others who are out there, but also in Washington, that American support for these humanitarian measures, but also for the broader issue of resolving the conflict. As hard as it is to speak about these issues at the time, now is the time, because we need to build the infrastructure. We need American leadership so that the Saudis and the Emiratis are rebuilding the water and sanitation infrastructure that's largely being destroyed. 57% of electricity lines in Gaza are destroyed. 4 out of the 5 sewage treatment plants are either damaged or destroyed. So much needs to be rebuilt, and without Gulf involvement, that's not going to happen. And there won't be Gulf involvement if there isn't a political strategy put forward. And this is in Israel's interest, it's in the region's interest. We cannot continue to manage the conflict. We need to work as hard as it is to resolve the conflict. So, I think continuing to hear your voices that this is important, that this is critical, that this needs to be done now, and can't wait till end of war or end of conflict, whenever that might be. I think that for those of you that are particularly interested in the climate and the water sanitation issues, then engage with us. And we're very happy to that my email be shared. If you're coming out to the region, if you're coming out to the region, we'd love to host you. And as we've organised with Frank, groups from Minnesota to go down to the River Jordan and sadly see a sewage canal, because that's what the River Jordan looks like today, in parts, south of the Sea of Galilee. In the past, we would take people on tours of the Gaza envelope and go to the beach right next to Gaza and speak as to how this beach was closed. But now it's clean, and the desalination facility in Israel is now operating. And what were the measures? So to see things on hand when you're visiting, but if you really get engaged to help us in this advocacy effort on the Hill, with the administration, with any administration, to make sure that these issues remain prioritized. We're often invited. I've spoken in Congress countless times, both on the Senate and House, in the different committees. We meet with many of the delegations of congressional members and staff to speak about these issues. This is all critical work, and this work can only be done together. That's the type of partnership that we're looking for. So thank you for that question.
I appreciate that, especially your urgency for resolving the conflict and a peaceful solution. Do we have a question?
Hi, I'm just wondering, you talked about the need for funding and financial support, and I'm curious about the role of federations and also about the role of New Israel Fund in supporting climate work and supporting your work.
So thanks for that question too. So we'd love to explore whether the local federations might be willing to support our work. At the moment, we're getting support from the Federation of Greater Washington, and so the Greater Washington DC area, and they're directly supporting some of our education programs on the Israeli side. So the federations traditionally choose to fund the activities within Israel, and that's fine, because then we get other types of funding to support the education program on the Palestinian and on the Jordanian side. We'd love to explore if the Twin City, the Federation of the Twin Cities could be supportive of our work here. And other federations, other Jewish federations across America at different times. We've had San Francisco, we've had New York support us as well. The New Israel Fund doesn't have a climate or an environment focus, so it hasn't had for a long time, and therefore we haven't been able to get grant support from the New Israel Fund. But donor advised, we do. So individuals that want to fund efforts through the New Israel Fund we're our own 501c3, so there's no real need for that. But some people still, prefer so that it also appears in the NIF sort of budget efforts. But NIF out of the UK, for instance, that's very helpful to us because we don't have tax status in the UK, and that's helpful there. I think another aspect of exploring what we can do together with the federations is how we can be involved in education with the federation. Now, these climate issues are issues I think that are of great interest to young Americans and young Jewish Americans. Our curriculum has been originally written in English, and therefore, we can work with Jewish schools across America. We can work with schools that are not particularly Jewish, but also are interested in interfaith. The Jordan River is holy to half of humanity. I've always wanted to do a program that links the Jordan and the Mississippi. This rather narrow, small river, the Jordan, but is so famous, and this incredibly long and wide river, the Mississippi, that's also incredibly famous. I think it would be remarkable if we could do programming together, in the Twin Cities and with Equipeace on connecting, I think, the Jewish community to Israel and the region through environment, climate work, but also from an interfaith perspective. I'm not sure what the situation for Minnesota St. Paul is at the moment, but in so many cities around the world, things are so polarized between, particularly Jewish and Muslim communities. And the environment is something that we share in common. The climate crisis is something that threatens us all. So I think that's another aspect of not only getting support, but I think we can help you. We can also help you work within your own community, whether it's within the Jewish community or whether it's in the relations between Jewish and other, particularly Muslim, but not only Muslim, but also be Christian communities. So I'd love to explore that with anyone that might be interested.
Those are really great and creative ideas for us to pursue here in the Twin Cities. Thank you for the question, and thank you, Gidon. Any other questions? We have a follow-up.
Talking about the River Jordan, I'm just curious if you see a future for the River Jordan.
Excellent question.
So great question. To make sure that everyone understands, the River Jordan south of the Sea of Galilee has seen about 95% of its water taken. So Israel's big project of the national water carrier by Ben Gurion was basically to stop all fresh water leave the Sea of Galilee. So you have the upper Jordan above the Sea of Galilee, that's always been flowing freely, and that refills the Sea of Galilee. But then Israel built this big water canal, like in Los Angeles or in Tennessee, that takes the water from one location, in our case the Sea of Galilee, and instead of the water flowing down the lower part of the river that would naturally exit the Sea of Galilee, the water is taken to Tel Aviv and to the Negev for legitimate reasons of, for domestic water supply and for agriculture. Syria and Jordan did the same. They blocked the Yarmouk River, which is the main tributary south of the Sea of Galilee, a river that starts in Syria, then becomes the Syrian-Jordanian, and then the Jordanian-Israeli borders. and the Syrians and the Jordanians took almost all of the Yarmouk River, and then Jordan has dammed all of the rivers on the eastern side of the Jordan Valley. And instead of fresh water flowing, so about half the water has been taken by Israel, and half has been taken by Syria and Jordan together, which has left the river pretty much dry. What's kept it wet is heavily saline water and sewage. And until about a decade ago, if you were visiting Israel and you went to a five-star hotel in Tiberias and you flushed the toilet, that toilet water was diverted by pipes south of the Sea of Galilee into the River Jordan, untreated. Now, that's no longer the case, but that was only completed about less than 10 years ago. On the Jordanian side, there's only 2 sewage treatment plants, neither modern, treating a small percentage of the population. Most of the sewage of about 700,000 Jordanians on their side of the valley percolate into the groundwater. There's no piping even. It just goes into cesspits and pollutes the groundwater, and then the River Jordan's the lowest spot. It comes in, it flows into the Jordan. This is a river that, in Judaism, in Christianity, and even in Islam, is considered a holy river. For Jews, it's, of course, where miracles takes place. For Christians, it's where Jesus was baptized. For Muslims, in addition to recognizing the Jewish and Christian sort of prophets, 4 of the companions to the Prophet Muhammad are buried on the eastern banks of the River Jordan. Yet we, the 3 Abrahamic traditions, have turned the river into a sewage canal. So what are the prospects of rehabilitating the river? Well, first of all, again, this is one of Equipeace's great success stories. And no doubt it's Frank's several visits to the river that have helped us in the turning point. But we really have succeeded. On the Israeli side, there's no more raw sewage. In fact, a year ago, Israel and Jordan signed a memorandum of understanding to clean up the River Jordan. Very much related to Equipeace's work, advocacy. One of my favorite photos, it's more than 15 years old, is the mayors of the River Jordan, Palestinian, Israeli, Jordanians together, jumping into a clean stretch of the river. Now, and they're literally holding hands and jumping in together. It's a wonderful sight. They're not best friends. In fact, back then and today, they all remain, adversaries, some would say enemies, lots of hate between their communities, but they all came to understand that they're all losers. That turning the river into a sewage canal has meant a tremendous loss of opportunity for their own communities, particularly in tourism, in more sustainable agriculture, which is, with the climate crisis, more important than ever. So it's the signing of that MOU, that agreement, that gives me hope. And there's a real connection between the signing of that agreement and the signing of the water energy agreement. Because if Israel is going to move water east and sell 200 million cubic meters of water annually to Jordan, we have the opportunity to use the River Jordan again as part of a natural water carrier. And instead of, we'd have to invest in getting the sewage out, we could use the natural channel of the river to move the water from the Sea of Galilee 3/4 down. And, because that's where there's a pipe taking the water to Amman, Jordan's capital. We could even, take it even closer to the Dead Sea and really rehabilitate the baptism site if we built just another pipe that would connect to that and really bring, still, we wouldn't bring it to its former glory, but rather than having 1.3 billion cubic meters, we would start to have 300, a quarter of its historical flow, but a quarter is a lot better than 5%, which is what it currently has. And that would promote jobs through tourism, through pilgrimage, and that would become an engine for shared prosperity. And we can speak to that because we did the work. We hired economists and planners from our 3 countries, and we raised €3 million to do the first master plan of the Jordan Valley on all sides. And the results speak to shared prosperity by cleaning up that river. So it requires leadership. It requires a change in attitudes. I mean, some of the statements that we've seen of leaders on all sides have been anything but showing leadership that's needed. But again, we do remain optimistic that this will happen because we can't disengage. We have a shared environment, and politicians can speak of building walls and throwing away keys. You have such politicians on your side too, I understand. They want to build walls and think that gets rid of the problem. It doesn't. It's hard truth, and it's painful, and we've gone through the pain, and are going through the pain. But in the end, quite frankly, if Jordan doesn't buy water from Israel, the Hashemite kingdom is at risk of falling. Today, if Israel doesn't continue to sell 50 million cubic meters of water to Irbid, Jordan's second largest city, Irbid gets water presently once a week. Amman gets water 8 hours a week. Things that are not imaginable to someone that lives on the Mississippi, of course. But other than Israel, no other country here in the Eastern Mediterranean, not Syria, not Lebanon, not Jordan, certainly not the Palestinian territories, none of them have 24/7 water. They all have intermittent supply. If Israel doesn't continue sell, if Jordan doesn't continue to want to buy more and more water from Israel, then water will be supplied in Irbid once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks. It threatens the stability of the Hashemite kingdom. Of survival, of their own interest, and of our own interest, will help leaders make the right decisions that relate to the shared environment that we live in.
It's an incredible reminder about water having no boundaries. Water is the source of all life, and conflict and scarcity and climate and misuse of the land just threatens that portal to life throughout that region. We're talking not just about Israel and Palestine and Jordan. It's also Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Turkey, all of the Lebanon, all of these countries, Egypt, severe threats with water issues. So Jordan is just a part of that. So thank you for your questions. Anyone else? We have a few minutes if anyone has any additional questions. Yes.
Thank you for the work you're doing. I have two questions. One is kind of technical, the other one is not so technical. The first one is, with all the desalination, what happens to the salt that's removed? Does that affect the ecology of the Mediterranean? And the second one is, how do you personally maintain hope?
So
Very
what was the
good
second
questions. Go ahead, Gidon.
What was the second question? I didn't hear it.
How do you maintain hope?
Oh.
And maybe that might be a good one to end on.
So you're absolutely right. Desalination has negative impacts. Now, firstly, the concern is energy. It's energy intensive, and Israel is currently 90% fossil in its electricity production. But the answer, of course, is to make sure that the desalination is powered by renewables, and that's what Project Prosperity is all about. So the number one concern is the energy, if it's fossil. The number two concern is the brine. That's the salts that are being removed by the desalination process. So you also need to appreciate the technology. This is Israeli-American technology. The membrane, reverse osmosis. This is a partnership that's created the cheapest water on earth. Desalinated water used to cost $2 a cubic meter. It's 40 cents and dropping, and it's all because of that technology. But brine remains a problem, and that's the salts that the membranes, sort of reject or don't allow to pass, that are then dumped back into the sea. And here, we're actually approached by a company from Palo Alto in the United States who've developed technology, methodology that takes that brine and exposes it simply to the air in order to capture carbon, and turns, this is somewhat technical, but it turns the brine into something useful, and something that can even be sold and make money. It does require an investment, but if the cost of carbon capture is properly expressed, then it's profitable. And this company, came to us about 3 years ago, after Project Prosperity got off the ground, and we've helped that company strike a deal with Mekorot, Israel's water company, to do a pilot. And we were actually hoping that at the Dubai COP there would be an announcement and a ceremony of this pilot project between an American company and an Israeli water company on how brine can be turned into something useful rather than being dumped into the sea. So we're hoping that that'll happen after the war or the next COP. But so there are technological solutions, but nevertheless, desalination should always be the last choice, like any technology, not the first choice. Because it is energy intensive. The first thing is you need to make sure that we're using water in a smart fashion, and generally the way to do that is to make sure it's properly priced. If people have free water, they'll generally waste it. So you need to think of social concerns. So a quantity needs to be clearly accessible to everyone. But beyond that, those that are filling swimming pools or using fresh water for their agriculture, that's not the right thing to do. So we need to price water right to encourage its conservation, reflecting its scarcity. And then when you price water properly, then you actually encourage technological innovation. Drip irrigation. It developed out of necessity because water's scarce and you want to use it as thinly as possible. When water's expensive, you can invest, and that's Israel's secret. Water is very expensive in Israel, and therefore there's so much innovation. It's scarce but expensive, and that supports innovation. I think one of the lessons also for the United States when water, in some states you own the water under your feet, under your property. You don't have to pay for it, and therefore you have no incentive to conserve it. And you see the demise of the environment and the misuse of water. And that's something Israel really can learn, can teach the rest of the world. How do I, and I'll close with this, how do I remain optimistic?
Just one thing, Gidon. Just before you answer that question, I just wanted to share with people that I messaged you a week after October 7th. This was on October 14th, and I asked you how you were doing, and you said devastated but not giving up. So I thought that might be a frame for the answer to this last question. How do you keep hope in this moment?
So I think, in this moment, firstly, I think I am born an optimist, and people say that to me. But I think what really keeps me going is the people around me, my staff, in all three offices, the level of commitment, the shared tears, and we have them all. The young people in schools, we continue to meet them. The 60 young professionals who last week attended another cohort, their faces that this is the present is not the future that they want in their lives, and they see these issues as helping them build a better future. That's what keeps me going. It's the people that want to see, that understand that we desperately need something better, and that these are practical ideas based on our shared environment that can play a role. Can it do it alone? No. Can it play a role? Very much so. And the opportunities of speaking before people like yourselves, because I can see the engagement, I can see the coin drop. So thank you.
Well, we thank you very much, and greetings from St. Paul, Minnesota. And do we have concluding comments here? Okay. Well, again, Gidon, nice to see you virtually, and we will have some final comments.
Thank you. Rabbi Spilker had to leave a little bit early, so I just wanted to, I'm Rick Linsk. I'm the chairman of Mount Zion's Israel Advisory Committee. And I just wanted to thank Frank, especially thank Gidon, thank Jonathan Eisenthal and Joe Nathan for getting everything started and organizing this, and thank everybody for coming on behalf of the Israel Committee. So thank you and be well, and we'll see you. And stay for refreshments. There are donuts and other sorts of refreshments. We're sorry we can't share them with you in person, Gidon, but maybe sometime in the future.
I'll take a check on that. Shalom from Israel. Toda rabah.
Thank you. Shalom.